By now, you've probably heard that XFCE is working on a Wayland port. This is being led by Brian Tarracone, who's been involved with the project sort of on and off for about 20 years now. Whilst I have tried the Wayland version, and it's usable, it's okay, it crashed in the video, it's an alpha. And that's fine, because this is very far away from actually being something they ship to users. Also, they are going to be keeping both the X11 and the Wayland version around, at least for the foreseeable future. How long that happens for, well, we'll have to wait and see. Right now, though, I do recommend at least trying it just to see the state it's in, because it's a lot further along than you might actually expect from the fact that this was posted back in June. The first preview release was just a couple of months ago. I will for sure be checking in on it when it is deemed stable or release ready or whatever term they want to use for it. Now, a few weeks back, another post was made by Brian. LLMs and XFWL4. XFWL4 is the window manager component of XFCE, specifically the Wayland version. Now, I was planning to discuss this last week, but it just didn't fit into my schedule, so we are doing this now, even though it was posted back on July 27th, so it is a little bit older now, but hey, it's fine. While LLM usage can be polarizing in the context of open source, I don't really see it that way. From my experience, there are three general software arguments regarding LLMs. Untested licensing conditions. Who actually owns the output of the LLM? How can it be licensed? Is it public domain? Is it under the original license? Is it some, new magical proprietary AI license? What is actually going on here? What can you actually do with it? Over-reliance and lack of skill development. If you're using these tools from the very day you start developing, or maybe worse so, you're an experienced developer and then fully rely on these tools and let your old skills rust, that becomes a problem. How do you train up the next generation? How do you keep yourself actually viable in this role? And obviously there is the matter of community disruption, noise from data centers, and then spurious claims about water usage. We're not getting into that here, though. It's a tool like any other. It has good parts and bad parts. On the bad parts, there are three things that stick out to me: training data and copyright. Among other sources, LLMs were trained on publicly available data. Well, about that, there has been some evidence of private repos on GitHub making their way into the datasets. Now, that's not a problem for me to deal with, but that is a problem for the companies that are relying on these platforms, who, assuming they were private repos, were not going to have the data included in these datasets. Not my thing to deal with, though. Outside the private proprietary stuff, a lot of that code out there is under a permissive license, whether it be MIT, BSD, Apache, various things like that. But a lot of it is also GPL licensed code, or variations of the GPL. Is training the LLM on my code copyright infringement? If someone gets output from an LLM that looks substantially similar to my code, and they don't know or don't follow my license terms, is that copyright infringement? Right now, we actually don't know the answer. Now, people who are against this happening, as you reasonably should be against this happening, would use a term like open washing, where you are taking code from a project and then sort of washing it around, jumbling it around, and then out the other side, you get something which at least claims to be clean of any of those license attachments. Now, is it? Again, that's still a matter which is legally being argued. The term open washing does predate AI. It has been used generally with companies just claiming something is open. It uses a source available license, and they're like, this is open source. Look, you can see the code. Look, you can do this thing with the code, but it doesn't actually follow all the requirements of it actually being open source. Basically, it is a way to launder code into a project where the license is incompatible, or sort of gain the benefit of saying something is open source without actually doing it. US law seems to suggest that training is fair game as long as the entity doing the training has legal access to the data they are training on. As for the rest of it, I'm not sure that's legally settled. Whilst this might be the case in the US, well, I don't even know if this is the case in the US because the US also has this thing called states' rights. So different states may end up doing things in entirely different ways. Outside the US is a whole nother question. How is Europe going to do it? Is it going to be a European Union thing, or are different countries in the EU going to do things differently? Then there are countries like Australia. I believe Australia has been contemplating the idea of, like, if your data is part of these like AI training systems, you should get some sort of royalty from that. Australia does not have the population to force this to happen, so nothing's actually going to happen from this, but different countries are going to have like very different interpretations of what should be done here. On top of that, it sometimes feels icky that companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are making all of this money off of this data, which most of it was published at a time where these tools didn't exist, and was not published under the assumption that sometime down in the future, there would be this giant data vacuum that would suck everything up, and you just kind of have to accept that it's there now. But I don't, however, think the best response myself is to just pretend none of it exists. It's a tool, and a useful one. That is something I think people are going to have to come to terms with. We are not at a point now where these tools are just like, oh, it's producing garbage. You can ignore the tool. You don't have to use them. I don't tend to use AI tools myself, but we cannot pretend like they're not actually useful at this point. There is a reason why developers who start using them really find it hard to stop doing so. Then there is the whole matter of PC hardware. Now, I feel like for a lot of people, if this problem didn't exist, I think a lot less people would actually have an issue with any of the AI stuff going on, right? Like, if you could still buy GPUs, RAM, all this good stuff at a regular price, SSDs as well, I feel like a lot less people would actually care. Now, there is a class action lawsuit against RAM manufacturers claiming that the shortage we are seeing is manufactured, and there are, like, anti-competitive price fixing being done here as well. I don't know how this is going to play out, but I'm very curious to see where it goes. But here I am with a Claude Max 5X subscription for the past year and a half. That is the $100 a month subscription, which is 5 times the amount you get with Pro. That's why it's the 5X version. I'm not comfortable with it, but the utility is just too great for me to take a principled stance here. I like it and I want it, so I'm using it. Maybe that's morally questionable or worse, but as I said, here I am. Now, here's the important part. The usage with the project. Yes, I use Claude quite a bit while developing XFWL4. I don't vibe code ever, and I probably use the LLM to generate less code than most people do. A lot of people read this part and then this part, and were like, oh, well, he's obviously lying then. Just read, like, the rest of the paragraph. After all, building things with code is my hobby and passion, and I'm lucky I got to do it professionally for a quarter century, and driving an LLM is kinda boring. That's a response I'm hearing from a lot of engineers. Whilst I do think that these tools are really useful, they generate, in many cases, actually not amazing code, but about as good as you're going to get from, like, a competent junior developer. That's not why they're an engineer. They're not an engineer to be a manager of a, like, artificial person. They're an engineer because they want to build shit. I think the kind of person that enjoys working with an LLM as, like, the main thing they enjoy is the same kind of person that enjoys being in middle management. The kind of person who isn't really that important to the stack. If you got rid of them, not much would actually change. But they're, like, sort of giving themselves a job. You can probably name some projects which have taken, like, a very principled stance against this technology, against using this technology, really in any form. Sometimes they allow it for, like, code review, things like that, but code generation, there are definitely projects out there where it's like, no, none of that, not at all allowed. But outside of those, this is starting to become the norm. If you're like me and you go around looking at random repos, you're going to see Claude. You're going to see various other tools, Copilot, all of these various things just pop up basically everywhere. And now this is something being used in projects like the Linux kernel. I don't see that genie going back in the bottle. You can say, oh, it's not that many people. Oh, like it's, it's not that big. Like I don't see these developers who are using these tools ever giving them up. Obviously, we can point to places where it goes bad, right? Like customer service. I don't think customer service is anywhere at the point where you should replace the people with AI. Granted, a lot of places had already offshored people and then replaced them with a command tree. So the idea of getting good customer service already had gone out the window long before AI. But I would say that's one of those places where it has only gotten worse, and kind of has gotten worse for companies as well, because you got these cases of AI promising things the company does not offer, or selling cars for prices that they do not sell them for. Whilst we can look at the open source projects, when it's like the proprietary stuff, what companies are doing, what's happening behind the scenes, that's stuff where you're just never going to see it. And I can't say it's immediately a bad thing, right? Because the tools exist. And if they're not using the tools, that's not going to stop the malicious actors doing so. That is the other thing people need to come to terms with. If you take a principled stance against these tools, that's not going to stop people attacking your project using these tools. If you're doing anything network related, security related, people are going to be using these tools as a way to breach your system. And it's at a point now where, yes, they do still find just made up problems, but at the same time, we are seeing a flood of real reports being made to projects like the Linux kernel. I'm never going to mention it in any other video, so we're going to mention it here. There was this guy who wanted to book a gym appointment, and he told his AI agent, hey, go book me an appointment. And the agent said, okay. Couldn't book him an appointment, found an exploit in the system as a way to go further into the future and then kick someone off the queue. That's a real thing that happened. When he realized what was happening, he said, yo, AI, reverse that, please fix that. It was like, nah, can't do that actually. They've actually got authentication on this part of it, so yeah, it's your problem now. There is a thought experiment known as the paperclip maximizer, where an AI system is tasked with the job of producing as many paperclips as possible. And the AI says, okay. And over time, it makes paperclips. And eventually, it runs out of paperclip material, runs out of the metal it needs. So it starts saying, well, let's just start taking other things. And basically where it ends is the paperclip maximizer turns every atom in the universe into a paperclip, because that's what you asked it to do. You asked it to make paperclips, so it's going to make them. Most of my time with Claude Code is researching and planning. One great match for LLM use here is helping me understand the finer details of XFWM4, that is, the X11 version. Since XFWL4 needs to duplicate all of its behavior, one common prompt of mine, look at the XFWM4 source in detail and determine everything there is to know about features, writes up a plan for how to implement it in XFWL4 to the note feature.md. I could do something for a while, and when it's done, I read the doc and then spend a while asking Claude questions about it and telling it the things I don't like and what I'd like to be done differently and update the docs. But as you can tell here, he's not using it to write the code, he is using it in this context to analyze the existing code and then understand the features that need to be brought over from that project. One thing I do like here is the I go do something else for a while, and when it's done, I read the doc. It's kind of bringing back the idea of the compilation coffee break, where on older, really old computing systems, compiling something would legitimately take a while, enough to go get a coffee, enough to go get some lunch. And that's not a thing anymore, because outside of doing something like the Linux kernel, which even then, if you're building the Linux kernel frequently, you're going to have a powerful system. Most things you build don't take that much time. Most of the time, I'll start working from the note stock myself, writing the implementation by hand. My guidelines for plain writing in Claude are to do things in phases, and so I'll complete a phase at a time and then ask Claude to validate what I've done. Often while I'm working, I'll decide to deviate from the plan, and I'll have to tell Claude to do the validation based on the outcome I want, not based on the adherence to the plan. Once it's done, I'll use code review and let Claude spawn sub-agents to do full review of the new code. I feel like even most people that don't like AI code generation are at least willing to work with code review, because even if it finds things which are not actual real problems with the code, it's not really that big of a deal, right? Like, some random person reading the code is also going to find nonsense. But if they're able to actually find problems with the code and generally make things better, I think at the end of the day, like, outside of all the other problems that exist, this isn't really that bad. This usually finds some problems, even problems the main Claude instance didn't find during its validation. I usually keep running the code review again and again, and after finding and fixing issues until there aren't any left. I actually haven't been doing code review for very long, maybe 6 to 8 weeks. I feel like this was done intentionally, as I didn't know about it. I wish I'd done it from the start, as it's very useful. Sometimes I will have Claude write some code for me. Okay, this is the important part. Usually it's when there's a lot of boilerplate, or if there's work that feels repetitive and tedious. This is something these tools are relatively good at. Well-defined, solved problems that you just don't really feel like doing yourself. When it's like a new problem, depends on what you're trying to do. Mileage may vary, but if it's something that, like, hey, I have a structure, just go and modify this to fit in all of these different places, at least from my experience, it has been quite good. I'll usually keep Claude code in manual mode and improve every edit after reading it, but for some more mechanical changes, I'll let it sit on auto for a while and review when it's done. Again though, this is for things where it's not interesting code, it's not exciting code, it's the kind of stuff where if you wanted to put the effort into, like, writing a script to automate it for you, like, no one would really complain about that. But occasionally I'll have it write more substantial code for me, usually for bug fixes, and occasionally for small features. I find it does a pretty decent job here, but I keep it on manual mode, and often ask to write the code in a different way, or take a different approach. People who just let their model just run off and do things automatically without reviewing anything, hey, if it works for you, more power to you. But there is a reason why there are a lot of people out there who spend tens of thousands of dollars on things that probably could be solved in much less, even if you just let the AI do everything for you. Whenever there's a bug, I'll start looking into the code myself. I want to keep my debugging skills from atrophying. This is very important. Make sure you don't overly rely on the tool. But in parallel, I'll also ask Claude to look into it, either by describing the problem or pointing it to a GitLab issue if there is one. I'll admit that it's rare for me to find the issue faster than Claude does, and there were some issues where I was completely lost, and Claude figured out something in 10 minutes that probably would have taken me days. This is a problem I'll get a lot more into in the Linux kernel dropping drivers video, where this is a problem that the kernel is definitely seeing, where bugs are being found in things that nobody's really looking at. Bugs are being found in things where nobody even realized there was a bug, and it's finding bugs at a rate that nobody knows how to deal with. XFWL doesn't have many unit tests. This is something that he'd like to improve. Of the tests that do exist, they were all written by Claude. I've always found testing to be tedious. I think most people do, and that's why most projects don't, and never did a very good job of it. Claude's tests are generally much more comprehensive than tests I'd write myself. Now, there are definitely cases, especially with older models, where they would write tests that are hard-coded to pass. At least from his experience, that hasn't happened yet. Now, is that a guarantee it won't happen? No, because again, going back to the article, and going back to the paperclip maximizer, if you let the AI do things without worrying what it's doing, it might do something a little bit insane. But on the topic of things that probably should have AI involved in them, maybe do a bit of grammar checking on your article with the AI. Don't write the article with the AI, but at least be like, yo, have I made any stupid mistakes? I wrote the first Wayland test using Smithy Client Toolkit, but for the rest of them, I told Claude to write them for me using my first test as a template. That is going to help as well. When you actually give it something to work from, give it a style you want it to work in, rather than just being like, yo, AI, make me thing that test code, and then just whatever it ends up generating. As for his LLM strategy, he doesn't really have one, just using the best model that is available, Opus 5 at the time of writing, not using any skills or other bits of automation, which could be useful, but is not something he is interested in doing. My usage isn't high enough to ever hit my 5-hour or weekly limit on the Max 5X plan, so I just don't worry about it. I started out with the Pro plan, but very quickly started hitting limits in the first 1 to 2 hours of the 5-hour windows, so I eventually upgraded after trying out extra usage for a bit and deciding I'd be spending more going down that route. As I said, I don't vibe code. I care about code quality and about understanding what I've built. I care about being able to maintain it in the future manually without needing an LLM to do everything for me. That, again, goes back to the whole atrophying of skills. I am really concerned about what happens when the current generation of developers sort of fades out and the next generation developers who are entirely LLM reliant end up taking those roles. I feel like a lot of skills, which maybe not in the next generation, maybe the generation after that, right? You know, things like COBOL development, that's not a skill anyone has. There was a time that people would examine the output of their C compiler because they didn't trust what the compiler was generating and they thought they could write better assembly. And frankly, there was a time where people could write better assembly than the compiler was going to generate. Assembly was just a skill that people had, and then over time that faded out. But this is more than just like one skill at a time. This is the possibility of all of the core foundational development skills just atrophying and in some cases not even existing in a generation or two after this. Jumping back up to the model here, yes, Fable does exist. He's just concerned about whether Fable is going to be around long term, the usage limits, all this stuff, so without worrying about all of that stuff, Opus 5 is what he's going with. I don't think I would have made anywhere near as much progress with XFWL4 without an LLM. It's easily saved me months of time, not in writing code, for non-trivial things. I can usually write it just as fast or faster, but in tracking down problems and helping me figure out solutions, whether that's in Claude reading and reasoning about my code to find something that's wrong, or in adding tons of targeted debugging prints to gather the information we need, and then sifting through the log file for me to do the analysis. At this point, we are not in 2022 any longer. This is not the launch of ChatGPT where you could look at it and say, this is garbage, this is nonsense, this is just making everything up. We're at a point now, and from what I can see, maybe judging by what's going on with the kernel 3 to 6 months ago, where something happened. An inflection point was hit where no longer is this just primarily generating garbage. Now it's actually useful. And there's a lot of people, this is just one project, but you can look at the kernel, you can look at so many other projects where people start using these tools and they can't stop using them because of how much it is changing their workflow. Is that a good thing long term? Again, we've talked about skills atrophying. I don't know. But that is where we're at now. So, welcome to your new future. I don't think XFCE is now vibe coded. XFWL4 is vibe coded. Everything I've read here doesn't indicate that. What I'm seeing is someone who is making use of this tech as a way to augment their workflow without necessarily just abandoning the idea of being an engineer. Now, if you just don't like any use of AI whatsoever, hey, it's your life, do what you want to do, but at least from my stance, this seems mostly fine. But hey, let me know your thoughts down below. Is this something you really care about? And, yeah. So, if you liked the video, go like the video. Let me know your thoughts down below as well. Have you tried out the Wayland version of XFCE, or are you going to try it in the future? I'd love to know. And go hype the video if you're on mobile. Subscribe, unless I already said that. And if you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and... Hey.
Something like this.